Hello everyone, this is Rana Norse ASMR. Welcome to my channel. This video is going to be me reading my favorite book. Well, the first part of it. It's not an extremely long book, but I definitely won't be able to do it in just one or two videos, so there's going to be maybe 4 or 5 parts to it. And before I start reading, I wanted to apologize for the background noise. I live literally on a bank of a river, and just on the other side there is this construction site, and they're building literally every day of the week, so there is no right time for me to record and not have background noise, and also the water carries sound really well, so I will try to edit it out as much as I can. And well, I hope that you'll enjoy this video anyway. So let's get started. Naive.Super by Erlend Loe. Part 1. The Fall. I have 2 friends, a good one and a bad one. And then there is my brother. He might not be quite as friendly as I am, but he's okay. I am borrowing my brother's flat while he's away. It's a nice flat. My brother has a fair bit of money, God knows what he does for a living. I've been paying little attention to that. He buys or sells something, and now he's away traveling. He told me where he was going. I have it written down. It might have been Africa. He has given me a fax number and instructions to fax him mail and messages. It's my little job, a simple and manageable job. In return, I am allowed to stay here. I appreciate that. It's just what I need. A little time to take it easy. My life has been strange lately. It came to a point where I lost interest in it all. It was my 25th birthday a few weeks ago. My brother and I were having dinner at our parents'. Good food and cakes. We were chatting about this and that. Suddenly, I surprised myself by reproaching my parents for never having pushed me to do sports at a high level. It was totally unreasonable. I said stupid things. That I could have been a pro today, had a fitness curve and money, been traveling all the time. I accidentally said that it is their fault. I never made anything of it, and that my life is plain and boring. I apologized afterwards, but it went on. The same evening, my brother and I played croquet. It's not something we do often. The old croquet set had rotten away under the garage shed. We drove to several petrol stations to find a new one. My brother paid for it with one of his credit cards. my brother started looking towards the bush, things had stopped being funny several minutes before. I could see what he was thinking. Surely that's unnecessary, I said. But I knew he wouldn't care. He placed his right foot on his pole and adjusted his aim to where if he get the stroke would cause the most damage. He stood there for a long time, aiming for the edge of the garden, the very end of the garden, where the grass stops being just grass and becomes more like moss. He made a couple of careful test swings to make sure he would be able to maximize the power of the strike and avoid hitting his own foot, which is the most humiliating thing of all. Then he crocketed my ball into the big bush. He crocketed the red ball really flipping deep into the big bush, into the heart of the bush where the sun never shined. It was a really fantastic shot. I don't blame him for it. I without a doubt have done the same thing myself. But my reaction, that's what surprised me. My plan had all the time been simple and quite cowardly. I was going to casually hang around the finish area and then croquet his ball so far away that he wouldn't believe it, and if I missed, my back would be free, since he still hadn't completed the course. But if I caught him, I would smack him against the pack at many kilometers an hour and top it all off by saying no when he suggested another game. I could forget about all of that. I had missed one too many. My brother had become an attacker, and now my red ball was under the big bush. I didn't give up. I wanted to come back. I planned to croquet his ball under the car. That was the only thing that kept me going. That he'd pay, that his ball some way or other would get stuck under the car. That I'd be able to watch him crawl on all fours or on his belly, so he'd get dirty and start swearing. But first, I had to hit my ball out of the bush. I lifted up the foliage and pushed it aside. Then I shone a torch in there, back and forth in the heart of the big bush. All the way in there I could see the ball. It was impossible to see that it was red, but there was no doubt it was my ball. My brother, naturally, stood laughing. I took the torch in my mouth and crept into the bush. It was dank, probably just a few degrees above freezing. I have hated this bush for as long as I can remember. Now I was about to strike. I aimed. This would go well. I was convinced it would only be a matter of seconds before I was on top of things again. I would get my brother, the bastard. But I took 3 turns to get out of the bush, and as I stood there brushing off the leaves and earth, still with the torch in my mouth, my brother rocketed me and sent me into the bush once more. the mark. In the end, my brother asked me if something was wrong. "What's the matter with you?" he said. I was going to say nothing, but then I felt everything frozen over inside me. It was overwhelming and upsetting. I have never felt anything like it, and I was unable to speak. Instead, I sat down on the grass and shook my head. My brother came and sat down next to me. He put his hand on my shoulder. We had never sat like that before. I started to cry. I hadn't cried for years. It must have come as a surprise to my brother. He apologized for having been so brutal during the game. Everything seemed meaningless to me. All of a sudden, my own life, the life of others, of animals and plants, the whole world, had no longer fitted together. I told my brother. He would never have been able to understand it. He got up and said, "Come on, shit happens. It'll be fine." He tried to get me on my feet, boxing me brotherly and shouting a little. My brother used to play hockey. He knows about shouting. I told him to take it easy. I said this was serious. My brother sat down and took it easy. We were talking. I was completely incoherent. Neither of us could understand much of what I was saying. But my brother took me seriously. I'll give him that. I could see he was getting worried. He hadn't seen me like this before. He said there are probably thousands of people who hit the wall every day. Most of them probably have a hard time of it for a while, but then it gets better. My brother is an optimist. He wanted to help. I sat there thinking this had to be the pit. I was afraid that I had become fed up with life, that I would never ever feel enthusiasm again. Then my brother said he was going traveling. He would be leaving in a few days and be gone for 2 months. He offered to lend me his flat. I said thank you, and we sat without saying anything until my brother looked at his watch and realized sports review had begun. He asked me whether I would object to going inside. It was my birthday after all, and there was cake left. The next morning, I awoke feeling things could not continue the way they had been. I lay there thinking. It wasn't anything to do with cricket. I was certain about that. Cricket is a small thing, and this was a big thing. Quite soon, it began to dawn on me that this had a direct connection with the fact that I had become 25 and wasn't handling it very well. To me, growing older has for a long time been associated with a certain uneasiness. I generally don't give a toss about space, but I do have a problem with time. While I was getting dressed, I realized there was no way I could spend this day doing the same things I used to spend my days doing. The days would have to become different, the nights too. I stood for a while looking out of the window, then I made a choice. I cycled up to the university and sat I had from time to time submitted material and told them I wouldn't be writing anymore for a while. Maybe never. I also cancelled my pet sit, the telephone and the newspaper subscription, and I sold my books and a TV set. The rest of my belongings I fitted into a rucksack and 2 cardboard boxes. I placed the boxes in my parents' attic and put the rucksack on my back and cycled home to my brother's place. There I sat sweating. I had performed a feat. No nonsense here. This was not Sesame Street. The ball. A few weeks have passed. I am sitting in my brother's flat. Once a day, I go down to buy some food, and if there is any mail, I open it and fax it to my brother. It is an amazingly long fax number. I feel increasingly sure he's in Africa. I've been looking for the note on which I wrote down his address, but I can't find it. Besides this, I hardly do anything at all. I flip through the newspaper or lie on the couch, staring into space. I have no plans. I still have the feeling that it's all pretty meaningless. It's no inspiring feeling. I've turned the tempo all the way down to 0. I am thinking that I need to start from scratch. How does one start from scratch? Yesterday I made a list of what I have and what I don't have. This is what I have: a good bike, a good friend, a bad friend, a brother, possibly in Africa, parents, grandparents, a large study loan, a BA degree, a camera, a handful of borrowed money, an almost new pair of trainers. This is what I don't have: plans, enthusiasm, girlfriend, the sense that things fit together and that everything will be alright in the end, a winning personality, a watch. Every time I have looked at this today, I've noticed that I have more than what I don't have. I have 11 things. I lack 6 things. This ought to be a source of optimism. But having read the list closely, it has become clear to me that it is altogether an unbalanced and bad piece of arithmetic. It won't even out. Some of what I have I could easily do without, and several of the things I don't have appear to me essential to living the way I like to live. For example, I'd swap my bad friend for some enthusiasm anytime, or a girlfriend anytime. But I know just as well as everybody else that it doesn't work this way. I played around, adding together the numbers on the list. 11 plus 6. It makes 17, quite a large number when dealing with essential things in a person's life. For a few seconds I was quite proud. But it makes no sense whatsoever. It's stupid to add together things one has and things one doesn't have. And besides, some of those things are less essential. The watch, for example. I wish I had a watch, but I wouldn't claim that it's essential. I just fancy having one, to pay more attention to time. As I've said, I have a problem dealing with time, and I think it's better to confront one's problem than avoid them. But the watch is essential. Hardly. fax coming. I wait for it to come through, and for the machine to cut the sheets. It takes about a minute. Now the sheet is falling to the floor. I get up to fetch it. It's from Kim. Kim is my good friend. I've known him for a few years. He's a good guy, and in the process of becoming a meteorologist. He's doing his practical on an island up north. As far as I have understood, he's alone on the island. He reads a few cogs and calculates something or other. Then he calls the Meteorological Institute a couple of times every 24 hours. I think he's a little lonely up there. He vexes me all the time. I have trouble keeping up with his pace. I've told him I'm not capable of vexing him as often as he vexes me. He says it's okay, but I know it weighs heavily on him. Without having said the words, we've kind of reached an agreement where he can vex me as much as he likes, while I'll only reply when I feel up to it. It's an agreement I can live with. I can see from the facts that Kim has been watching some program or other on TV. He quotes 1. Quit your job. 2. Go traveling. 3. Make new friends. I have told Kim how I am doing these days. He's trying to help me. That's good of him. Under my brother's desk, I have a box on which I've written Kim. In it, I put all the faxes he sends me. The box is already almost full. After Kim learned that I am staying somewhere with a fax, there's hardly been a quiet moment. Now I'm lying down on the couch again. Something is going to have to happen. Not necessarily something big, just something. I decide to go out and buy something that will make me think about nice things, or preferably just smile. I visit several shops, but can't find anything that I like. I try to define some criteria for what I seek. For some reason, I've become caught up in this thing about lists. Lists are a good thing. I'll be making many of them in the time to come. I'm making one right now. After a bit of thinking, it becomes apparent that I'm looking for an object which is small enough for me to carry easily, costs no more than 100 krona, can be used many times, can be used indoors as well as outdoors, can be used alone or with someone else. It gets me active and makes me forget about time. I sit down on a bench and take a closer look at the list. For a long time, it is an honest list. I'm happy with it. Maybe a suitable object exists and maybe it doesn't. It's not that important, but the list is important. This is a discovery to me. This has value. I sit there wondering which objects will fulfill my desires. It could be several, but I just want one thing. Suddenly it is clear to me that what I seek is a bowl. A bowl, plain and simple. I feel a sting of eagerness. It's been a long time since I thought about bowls. I'm happy that it came to mind. This is the way to go. Now I just have to find a bowl. How does one choose a bowl? The world is full of bowls. People use them all the time for fun, games and probably other things. It all comes down to choosing the right one. I visit a sports shop. They have an overwhelming selection of bowls. Nice, expensive bowls made from leather and other durable materials. I examine them Here the selection is more sensible. Fortunately, they only have a handful of models in a few different sizes and colors. I weigh a few of them in my hand and bounce a couple of them on the floor. In the end, I make it simple and choose a red plastic ball of average size. It costs just under 50 kroner. They give me a bag to carry it in, then I cycle home. I fix skim. In the best of moods, I put a red ball. I lie down on the couch with the ball resting on my chest. I'm waiting for the evening to come. When it gets dark, I'm going to go down into the court and throw the ball against the wall. I look forward to that. The tree. I've been throwing the ball in the courtyard several nights in a row now. Usually I go down after the late news and place myself in a corner where there are no windows. It is a little used patch illuminated only by a single light bulb. There is something very good about throwing. I don't quite know what it is. More people ought to throw. We ought to be throwing, every one of us. Things would look different then. We would be happier. I throw the ball against the wall and let it bounce off the ground once before catching it. It's a good ball. It always comes back. And it fits comfortably in my hand. I had forgotten how good it is to feel a ball, to hold it. It's so round. It makes me forget about time. I'm throwing again now. The red plastic ball hits the wall and emits a little tone. Then it bounces off the ground and emits another one. Then I catch it, I hold it for a moment and throw it again. I do it automatically without thinking about what I'm doing. I can think about other things. Tonight, I'm thinking about my grandfather. A few weeks ago, he told me a story. It's a story about a good world. My grandparents live in a yellow wooden house they built a long time ago. They have a big garden that they've always spent a lot of time on. Flowers and trees and bushes mean a lot to them. They know all the names and when things are supposed to be planted and when they have to be watered and pruned. They often talk about plants and give flowers to friends and family. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. When they built the house, my grandfather planted an apple tree at the bottom of the garden. I have never seen that tree. It was gone when I was born, but I've heard about it. When the tree had grown for many years, it started to yield apples, a lot of apples. My grandmother used to make juice and preserves from the apples. It was a good apple tree. But then something happened. It had been a good summer and the apples were nice and big. They were about to be picked, but one morning the tree had been destroyed. Several thick branches were lying on the ground. My grandfather said it looked bad. It would not grow apples again. The tree was going to die. My grandfather went inside to give my grandmother the sad news. Then he took off his work clothes, put on something more appropriate, and went down the lane past the cemetery and down to the college. There he spoke to the principal. The college acted, and after some time, 3 young students came forward. They had been out pinching apples, and things had got was a prank. Not a big thing, but serious enough. And both my grandfather and the principal were concerned with sorting things out fair and square. A new apple tree cost 150 kroner in those days. It was agreed that the boys should pay for a new tree. They would pay 50 kroner each. My grandfather told me it was a lot of money back then. The boys would pay a weekly sum the rest of the autumn and well into spring until everything was paid back and they were even. My grandfather had himself been to that college and he knew the boys didn't have a lot to get by on. They were boarders, some of them were far from home and their families had already dug deep into their pockets in order to send them to college. They had to take the money from an apple tree out of their own allowances. That probably meant any expensive and boyish activities had to be limited considerably. They could hardly buy anything, not go to the cinema, not treat the girls to a soda. Pretty much nothing at all. Every Saturday the boys came dejectedly to my grandparents' door to pay. They said very little. They just had out their hands and dropped the coins into my grandfather's huge palm. He nodded gravely and confirmed thereby that things were going the way they should. It went on that way. Winter came and went, and then spring. In May, the garden was once again in bloom, and the Polytechnic was about to go on vacation. The boys were going home for summer. When they came by for the last time, they were all dressed up. It was something of an occasion for them. They rang the doorbell and my grandfather invited them in. She had made coffee and waffles. The boys were served and they made the last payment and shook my grandparents' hands. The case was closed. The boys were relieved, they cheered up and for the first time they talked with my grandparents. They told them about school and summer. They told them where they came from. Their faces were happy, the debt was paid. They were cleansed and could finally hold their heads high. After a while, the boys got up to leave. Goodbyes were said, and they walked towards the door. Then my grandfather got up. "Hang on," he said. "There was one more thing." And the boys stopped. My grandfather crossed the floor. He went over to the big kitchen dresser and opened it. He stuck his hand deep inside it and came out with 3 envelopes. Then he walked over to the boys and gave one to each of them. The boys couldn't quite understand. They looked at each other. Then they opened the envelopes and tears started running down their cheeks. My grandfather had given their money back. I'm still standing here throwing the ball. I really got into the rhythm of it. I can't see any reason to stop even though the going is good. This game won't go bad, no matter how long I keep at it. It can't possibly go bad. My grandfather told me he had been planning to give the money back all the time. It wasn't about the money, he said. I'm thinking about the boys, they're grown-ups today, probably over 50 years old. They must have had the feeling that the world was good, that things fitted together, that something meant something. I wonder what they are doing now. They probably have families themselves and gardens with apple trees. My grandfather faxes me back answering yes to the first question, but no to the second one. Kim always faxes me back immediately. It's like he's just sitting there waiting for me to fax. That worries me a bit. While I sat looking at the sheet from Kim, which said yes and no, the uneasiness came back. I realized I had moved and that I was spending increasingly more time over by the bookcase. The book stood there and I stood a distance from it. I peered at it while moving closer and closer. In the end, I was sitting with it in my lap, thinking I might just as well explore the core of my problem now rather than later. I'm not quite sure, but I think it was a mature decision. The book is written by a professor called Paul. I'm thinking that someone with a name as friendly as that couldn't possibly want to scare me. I have been reading for several hours now, and I am discovering that my entire being is becoming influenced. Even though it says Paul is known to write in simple terms about complicated things, I find it difficult. Paul dabbles with difficult things. My basis for understanding him is weaker than average. I opted out of maths and physics after my first year of secondary school. At the time I figured I could see a whole lot of other things I'd rather base my existence on. Today I'm not so sure anymore. Maybe it was a mistake. In other words, I don't understand everything. Maybe I understand even less than I think, but what I do grasp fascinates and scares me. I had no idea my brother read books like this. There are obviously things I don't understand about my brother. There is even more I don't understand about me and time. In a laboratory in Bonn stands a 3-meter-long metal cylinder. Paul writes that it is shaped like a submarine and lies in a steel frame surrounded by wires and measuring instruments. It's an atomic clock, and it is currently the most accurate clock known. It is more accurate than Earth's rotation. Such accuracy amazes me. It obviously has little to do with the Earth. It's just something somebody has decided. I like that, strangely enough. I feel time becomes more tangible that way. I think I'd like to have an atomic clock to compensate for the irregularity of the Earth. A second is added now and then. The last time they added a second was in June 1994. Nobody ever said anything about that. The definition of time has changed due to atomic clocks. Before, a second used to be 1/86,400th of a day, but now it has become 9,192,631,077 cycles of a cesium atom. I think it's a lot. This information puts me out of the game. I feel unwell and need to fetch the ball. I throw it for a while against the refrigerator before I'm able to continue reading. I remember when we used to drink milk in primary school. Many of us had digital wristwatches with a chronometer function. We had hundreds. We timed the most absurd things. It was the big thing in those days. For a long time it cycles per second. I can't picture it. It's too many. My ability to estimate how many units there are in an amount is limited. I can easily tell whether there are 4 or 9 cows in a field, but if it's more than 15, I have to count, and anything more than 1,000 doesn't really matter. I have no means of controlling the cesium atoms. I have to assume that Paul knows what he's talking about. I have to take his word for it. Now I've read some more. It gets worse and worse. Paul says gravity influences time. The man knows no limits. Totally without warning, he says that time is influenced by gravity and by movement. I look at the sleeve of the book. It's from a serious publisher. What he's saying is probably right. I get annoyed. Why hasn't anybody told me about this? Don't physics teacher understand that this kind of information makes all the difference? Are they stupid? The reason I opted out of physics was because we sat drawing protons and neutrons without grasping how it all really fitted together. I was bored. I'd much rather turn to face the girls and make a ring with my left thumb and index finger, and then move my right index finger in and out of this ring repeatedly. Time was never mentioned. Not one of my teachers have ever mentioned time. Not so much as a word. I owe to find out whether they know anything or not. Maybe they've known all along. In that case, I owe to wreak revenge. I owe to give them a hard shove in the back when they least expect it. I feel cheated. I feel I can't trust anybody anymore. Time on the sun passes 1/2 billionth slower than with us. It has to do with gravity. Paul says gravity is stronger out there. I thought time was time and gravity was gravity. Evidently, that's not the way it is. With a couple of really good atomic clocks, one could prove it in the Empire State Building. I'm not making this up. If one places an atomic clock at the bottom of the Empire State Building and another one at the top, after a while, one will see that the one at the top goes faster. During the course of a human life, one would save a few thousandths of a second by staying at street level. Those sitting at the top would be a little older than the rest of us. Now I'm putting the book down. I feel I'm becoming groggy. I'm in rebellion. There is no time. I can hardly see the conclusion being any other. There is at least not any one single time. My time, your time, Paul's time, the sun's time, lots of times. Many times.